Well, I know that rain sounds exactly like a sleeping machine, the little noise you put on to go to sleep. So if you doze off, we'll understand. But we are going to make our effort to trek our way down through the rest of Exodus, looking at the crimson thread of Jesus Christ in Exodus, looking at the redemptive scheme of God playing out as we go through our Bible. We started this morning in the Bible class. This morning in the worship hour, we continued on that journey. And this afternoon, the hope is that we will be able to complete that journey. I have no idea what the wire of this thing is going to do right now, but if it's distracting, I apologize. I noticed one week it was like sticking way out, so I have done my best with that wire, but that's all I can do. All right, so we are in what for me is I'm in 13. So I'm in chapter 13. And we just broke into 13 with 13:14. Do your children see memorials? And so that's how we finished this morning. And so we continue in 13 and 13:17. And I think there's an important biblical principle here that is essential for us to understand in 13:17, which is complaints against God are always blind. Then it came to pass when Pharaoh had let the people go that he did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines. This is what we're talking about what God did with them. He doesn't lead them through where the Philistines are, which is kind of an interesting statement. That's the most direct route. So a lot of people might say, well, I'm going to take that route. This thing is like wrapped around my arm, so I'm going to adjust my microphone. Why don't we take the most direct route? And so God doesn't take them that way. Good grief. I was the day in preaching school when they talked about how to put microphones on. I was out that day. I was sick. And so sometimes I struggle with the microphones. Walter does his best, but all right, so back to it. So why not take the direct route? Well, look, God has thought this through. God can see things we can't see. God knows things that we don't know. God, not only does He see things we can't see and know things we don't know, He can play out a scenario in His mind and say, that wouldn't work out the way I want it to. And He can play the scenario the other way and He said, that's exactly how I want it to work out. And that's what He's done here. He said, although it was near, for God said, lest perhaps the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. Also factored into God's decisions is my imperfections. If these people had been tougher people, if these people had been more faithful people, He might have walked them right through there. But He said they will get discouraged seeing war and turn back. And that's how God addressed them, and that's how God handled them. And the message or the note that I have in 13:17 is, complaints against God are always blind. They're always blind. And, it's the guy that makes you so angry because he's out in the middle of the road at night in the pouring rain and he's flagging you down and you're like, what is this idiot doing in the middle of the road? And you stop and he's like, the bridge is out up ahead. And all of a sudden, that guy's not so dumb, is he? He's keeping you from dying. You didn't know what he knew. How much more so when we make complaints against the way that God carries things out in our lives or around us? We don't know what He knows. That's the famous speech God gives to Job at the end of the book of Job. Where were you when I? And then he fills in the blank at all the things that he had done that Job had nothing to do with. And Job really, frankly, knew very little about. All right, so from there we go to our famous passage, 14:16 and following, where they cross the Red Sea. So we have the Red Sea crossing that comes up. And so it's interesting. This Red Sea crossing is set up because He wanted them to go a better way. But when they look at it and they're encamped against the water and the enemies of God are coming, to their human wisdom, they've come to the worst possible place. And so, not to belabor that point, but we just don't get it sometimes. He says, lift up your rod and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it. And the children of Israel shall go on dry ground through the midst of the sea. This is probably, and you'll have to decide this for yourself. Sometimes people play the superpower game. If you could have any superpower, what would you have? if you could see any miracle, miracle would you go back to see? And this is probably the miracle that I would want to participate in, because I've always been a big ocean person. And in my mind, this is probably not true, but in my mind, you could see like sharks swimming through the wall of water, right? I mean, I don't know why you wouldn't be able to. But in my mind, that would just be unbelievable to see God perform such a miracle. I'd like to also have a chance to see that pillar of fire by night that gave light to them. I couldn't appreciate it fully because I live in the age of electricity, but it would still be amazing. But to someone who lived in that age, it would be even more amazing. I live in the age of CGI stuff and everything, so like, I can't even imagine. So he divides the Red Sea. This is the quintessential moment. In fact, when you get over to Romans and Paul is talking about deliverance, he talks about splashing down into water, baptism, Romans 6. And even, I believe it was N.T. Wright had said, he was in a discussion forum where one of the fellow ministers, I think he was a Methodist, said, well, you know, baptism's not to be freed from sin. And he said, well, I don't know how a Jew would have read Romans any other way. He puts them in Romans is written, especially the early part of Romans, is written as the Exodus scene. And baptism in Romans 6, 1 through 12, baptism is the Red Sea moment. It is the crossing out of captivity. And he said, I don't know how they would have viewed it any other way than you splash down into the water and you come up delivered from sin. And that he's absolutely correct about that. But this is the quintessential moment. If the theme of the book is deliverance, then this is the quintessential moment. Because yes, there's a lot that happened before to deliver them. And yes, there's a lot that happens after to deliver them. But they will always remember, down through time, that God delivered them from the greatest threat they ever faced, which was the Egyptian army coming back to reclaim them as a workforce, but also all the goods they had plundered, they had taken. And the most powerful army in the world, and the Bible says that he brought out all of his chariots, he brought out his horsemen, he brought out all these. I mean, we're talking about, you know, their version of today's U.S. military. This is the greatest military power in the world. And not only did they fail in recapturing them, but they died God killed them trying to do it. Drowned them in the same sea that they had just passed through. Absolutely amazing moment, quintessential moment in the book of Exodus, quintessential moment in the theme of Exodus of deliverance and that crimson thread of Jesus in the book of Exodus. 1430, real simple here. I just boxed these words in. I did this with Moses. I would say like the Lord said to Moses. I box in Lord, underline, and box in Moses. For how many times the Lord said to Moses, the Lord said to Moses, the Lord said to Moses, the Lord said to Moses. But here, I box this in. The Lord saved Israel. I think that is an essential thing to understand. Did they have faith? Yes, they did. Did they walk across the Red Sea as on dry ground? Yes, they did. Did they go out into the wilderness? Yes, they did. Did they do many good things along the way? Did they obey many times? I know we can point out the negatives, but did they do many things to contribute to their deliverance? Yes, they did. But make no mistake about it, the Lord saved Israel. None of that happens without His help, without His direct involvement. And so as a saved person, it's important for me to remember the Lord saved me. Did I make some choices? I did. Did I do some study? I did. Did I do some good things? Yes, I did. Now, I'm not perfect. You can focus on my negatives too. But the bottom line is this. I'm saved not because I studied my Bible. Was that part of it? Sure. I'm saved not because I got baptized. Was that part of it? Sure. That's the line. That's where he said it. I'm saved not because I do right all the time. Do I try to do right? Yeah, I try to do right. But why am I saved? I'm saved because the Lord saved me. I could not save myself. They could not save themselves. And that's why the Red Sea was so integrally important. Because their backs were against the proverbial wall. And God did the impossible in order to save them. 15:16 is our next stop. This one is pertinent to us today. We've sung some songs this morning. We've sung some songs this afternoon. This one's real simple. Live the songs that you sing. Listen to what they're singing this song, the people of Israel are. And listen to what they sing. Fear and dread will fall on them. They're talking about the people of the land of Canaan. By the greatness of your arm, they will be as still as a stone till your people pass over, O Lord, till the people pass over whom you have purchased. They're talking about the people of the land of Canaan and how the fear of God would be upon them and that His people would pass over the land. These are the same. You could actually do this with the people who will die in the wilderness. These are the exact same people who will believe the 10 bad spies. These are some of these people that are singing this song right here are going to go into the land and give a bad report and say that we were as grasshoppers in their eyes. Live the songs that we sing. Don't sing, take the light, send the light, whatever. Don't sing, send the light, and then not go send the light. Don't sing the gospel is for all and then not. Don't sing farther along, but then despair of life so much that you give up on God. We got to live the songs that we sing. Singing is a commanded part of the Bible. It is instructed to us to do so. It is good for us. It is necessary for us. We connect in an emotional way with God in song that we don't in other ways, but we must live it. These people aren't going to live the song that they're singing, unfortunately. 15:18 is our next stop, just a little farther down, and this is a maxim. This is a maxim. The Lord shall reign forever and ever. So many of the things that are said in the book of Exodus and other places are conditional. If you do this, then that'll happen. If that happens, then I'll do this. I'm angry, so I may destroy you. Oh, God, please don't. Okay, this is a maxim. This is true and always will be true regardless of the choices of man. God will reign. It doesn't matter what my choice is. He will reign. If I choose to reject Him, He will reign. If I choose to receive Him, He will reign. If these people decide to go off into idolatry, He will reign. If they decide to be faithful to Him, He will reign. God, the Lord, shall reign forever and ever. Now, right after that maxim, or not long after, you get down to 15:23 and following. And I put this down as this is the people who will die in the wilderness. This is their first post-deliverance murmuring and intercession. When they came to Marah, they could not drink the waters of Marah, for they were bitter. Therefore, the name of it was called Marah. We know they're going to turn the water sweet. They're going to be able to drink. But it doesn't. But the pattern, which has already been set, we've already seen the pattern. Now they've come across the Red Sea. And you'd say, well, that surely will wake them up. No, but think about your own life at times, especially if you're younger or if you remember when you were younger. You get baptized and you think, oh, well, man, I've been baptized. I've studied and got baptized. Surely I won't sin now. And then you sin. And that can be discouraging. Now, of course, this is a nation being rebellious. That's a little different than personal sin. But some principles are there. And, of course, what happens? Moses intercedes for them. This is the pattern that's going to repeat over and over again. Of course, and God is gracious to them over and over again. He punishes them sometimes, but He's often gracious to them. And then, of course, 16:13 through 15, they're hungry, and so God sends forth the manna, and they see it, and they say, "What is it?" Which is manna, and so it gets named. So I don't know if you know this, but manna is just, what is it? So the manna bread is just called what is it bread, because they didn't know what it was. And so they go out and I don't know why I didn't notice this before. I think it's children's coloring sheets are probably some of the worst false doctrine we teach. Because I can remember as a kid coloring these coloring sheets where they went out and picked up these, it wasn't exactly like bread, it was like sea stars, but it was bread. And that's not what they did. It's a meal, and they got it in a pot, and then they would make cakes out of it. So when they go out there, it's a fine meal. And so God sends forth manna to them They collect it every morning. It rots if they leave it. Of course, they disobey God, and they have people have it rot. And then on the sixth day, they gather their double, because on the Sabbath, they're not going to work. He's establishing the Sabbath concept with them, the Sabbath teaching with them, even through the giving of the manna. So, then you come to 17:6, and we have the repeating of the pattern where they mumble and Moses intercedes. But this one's special because it's a preamble to Moses' death sentence. This is what sets up the death of Moses. Behold, I will stand before you there on the rock in Horeb. This is God talking to Moses. God will stand before Moses on the rock to Horeb. And you shall strike the rock, and the water will come out of it, that the people may drink. And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. He goes out and he strikes that rock of Horeb. It says he spoke to it and he struck it. That rock of Horeb is a type of Christ. It's a picture of Christ. It is a rock in the desert. We sing about that, the Lord's my rock. But more than that, it flows forth and gives living water. Gives life. And Moses does exactly what he's told to do in this particular scenario. But the next time he comes by the rock of Horeb, he's going to have that temper problem again. He's going to become angry, and he's going to sow sin as to lose his life. But this sets that up. If it's interesting. If they'd not crossed the rock of Horeb the first time, he'd be okay the second time. But because they crossed it the first time, he's not going to be okay the second time. We'll get to that when we get there. All right, just remember, rock of Horeb, Moses struck it. All right, our next one up is a very famous passage in 17:11, and it's holding up the hands. If you go to 17:11, and so it was when Moses held up his hands that Israel prevailed, and when he let down his hands, Amalek prevailed. Keep going. But Moses' hands became heavy. There you go. So they took a stone and put it under him that he sat on it, and Aaron and Hur supported his hands, one on one side, the other on the other side, and his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. Some men break themselves trying to get things done, and it's almost like a feeling of, I have to. And I get the indication from the book of Exodus that Moses is kind of that way. They go and get him a stone to sit down. They go and hold up his hands. Now, we don't see an objection to that. In other words, he's not an objectional man. He's not prideful. He just seems like a guy who it's on his shoulders and he tries to do it. Now, we see him ask for help from Aaron, so that's good. Maybe he had a positive disposition, but you find this same problem where later on, Jethro's telling him, you're doing too much. You've got to delegate. You've got to let other people help. And in this particular case, they're holding up his hand. And that has become a phrase that we still somewhat use in English, where someone will say, yeah, I did these great things, but there were people holding up my hands. And it's a reference to this passage. They succeeded because Moses' hands were up. But make no mistake about it, they succeeded because Aaron and Hur held Moses' hands up. And so, and of course, even all that means nothing if the God of heaven didn't set up the scenario to say, you're going to succeed if your hands are up. And so, really, God is at the heart of it all. All right, number next is what we just referenced, what I just alluded to. 1827 is Jethro leaving Moses. You can mark that in 1827. You can mark it farther back in the passage if you want to. But the idea here is, I noticed when we first ran across Jethro and Moses went out to the wilderness, I can't help but think of Laban when I think of Jethro. He's like the anti-Laban. He actually treats him well. He actually makes him a part of his family. He actually is a righteous and wise man. And he comes to this scenario in Exodus 18 where Moses is just wearing himself thin, sitting and dealing with all the problems of the people because he has a direct connection with God. They can come to him and get the discernment of God. And it's Jethro who says, no, you need to set captains over their thousands, their hundreds, and their tens. They'll take it to them, and then they push it up to you if it's important enough. And you got to delegate. And then he just kind of goes home. He just kind of leaves. And we don't know a whole lot about Jethro other than he was a priest in Midian. And he gave one of his daughters to be the wife of Moses. But the real message here is take wisdom wherever it comes from. And especially respect and listen to wise men or women. Listen to the wise people in your life. This blesses Moses unbelievably because he does this. The next up is 20, verses 1 through 4. It's interesting how much God focuses on don't be idolaters right before they become idolaters. It's almost as if God knows what they're going to do. And that's because he does. And God spoke to all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image of any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You should not bow to them nor serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting iniquity. Okay, so what is the idea here? What are they going to make? They're going to make a bull out of gold. Okay, is that a graven image? Yes. Is that a creature that lives on the earth? Yes. Do they bow down to it? Do they worship it? Yes. They literally take everything that he just said and obliterate it in short order. And we're going to see that in just a moment as we make our way through the end of the book of Exodus. They're going to break these commandments. 21:16 is an essential passage for us in America today. Sometimes there's a misunderstanding. The Bible talks a lot about slavery, and there's a misunderstanding about how God views slavery. There are different types of slavery that exist. There are different reasons that people end up in slavery. Chattel slavery is described in 21:16. It has always been forbidden by God. He who kidnaps a man and sells him, or if he is found in his hand, shall surely be put to death, Exodus 21:16. And in essence, what you had in the transatlantic, and really you can say transatlantic slave trade, that slave trade is far older than the transatlantic part of it. That's just, it really kicked up there because Europeans had a bunch of money and could come down and buy those slaves. It was a brand new, really big market. But that slave trade had been around since at least 900, mostly selling black people into slavery in the Middle East. And the way it worked was, in essence, what it's talking about in 21:16. It's certainly how it worked. I know that and I hear jokes about this, and I hear people talk about this. There is this idea that Europeans pulled up in ships and jumped out and grabbed Africans off the coast. I'm not going to say there were never slave raiders, but that is not the predominant way that the transatlantic slave trade happened. They purchased stolen people. These kingdoms in Africa that sold the slaves went and they had other people that they viewed as lesser than them, and they would go and take from among them. They would dominate them and kidnap from among them people and drag them back to those slave ports and then sell them to whoever wanted to buy them, whoever would pay money for them. And that has always been condemned by God. Now, in Exodus, it's going to talk about if you owe a debt and you can't pay it, you can be sold into slavery to pay your debt. You can get freed from that slavery. But indentured servitude, if you come, you're going to have people in a couple of books from now, but we're going to have people coming in who are going to say, look, we're destitute and we're lowly. We will be your servants. We'll be your slaves if you let us live here and do well. There is that concept, completely accepted. There is war where you make war with somebody and they lose to you, and certain percentage of them or their fighting men or whatever become your servants. God never really props those things up and says that they're good, but He outright makes punishable by death The idea of running over and kidnapping somebody, taking somebody, and selling them into slavery. In essence, by the way, what happened to Joseph. And look, that type of slavery does exist. It's just that wasn't really a transatlantic slavery. That would be more like the Barbary pirate type slavery. If they catch you, you're a slave forever. You're chained to a boat and you'll never get up off that boat again. That kind of thing does exist. It exists all over the world today, sadly. But it is absolutely punishable by death in the book of God. And I think that was a very important point for us with our history in America to stop and recognize, especially because some people get confused and think that God is for slavery, and then they equate slavery to the type of slavery that existed in the United States of America. Those slaves, if you took those slaves, if you went back to 18 whatever, and you took some of those slaves and you dropped them into like Greek slavery, they'd think they won the lottery. They'd be respected and educated and have their own space in the home and all these kind of things. Of course, depending on the level of their work. And so I think people, they get that and they go, wait a minute, God is for, or God somehow approves of what happened in American slavery? And the answer to that is no. Those people that participated in that were worthy of death in the eyes of God. And many of them did die. Lots and lots and lots of blood was shed to end that slavery. And appropriately so. That's worthy of a death sentence. All right, let's keep moving forward there. 23:2 is another kind of famous passage. Don't follow a multitude to do evil. You've heard that. We find it right here in the book of Exodus. This is important for our young people to pay attention to. I've got kids now that are kind of that age, and I know how it goes. I know exactly what you think and say to your parents, or as you're going through life and you hear certain Bible passages and you go, but everybody does that. But no, all of my friends are, and then fill in the blank. Well, everybody gets to fill in the blank. If you are acting like everybody else, then you are not being distinct. And I'm talking about specifically when you're comparing yourself to the world. Unfortunately, worldliness also will eke its way into the church. And one of the sad things is explaining to your children, well, we don't do that. But they do that. That's their choice. We don't do that. We're not going to do that. And, you have those kind of conversations with your kids. I told my daughters, you might be very good at sports. When the church meets, you're at church. Yeah, but other people, everybody, hey, look, other people are going to make their decisions about how they handle that. But I don't care how good at sports you are. I don't care, and I used to think about this it was a daydream, but I was like, man, if I ever made it to play in the NFL, I just couldn't do it. And that's the reason I didn't play football. But I couldn't do it because I'd want to be at worship. And that really is true, though. That really is true. That is really why Mitch is here today. And is because he didn't go to the NFL because he had to worship on Sunday. He's going to be a Christian. But that really is a thing. You'd have to work that out. You'd have to figure that out. I'm not going to not assemble with the saints on the Lord's Day because I want to play a sport, much less for lesser reasons than that. Man, I guess I'd never contemplated the cost of idolatry. Look at 23, 25, and 26. They go into idolatry. We know this. They're going to stay in idolatry. We know this. But I want to remind you of what was promised them if they just didn't engage in idolatry. So you shall serve the Lord your God, and he will bless your bread and your water, and I will take sickness away from the midst of you. Keep going. No one shall suffer miscarriage. Now, for the women in here or the women listening who have, and the men or the husbands of those women who have been through miscarriages, I spent some of the hardest time I've spent in a long time on the phone over the past few weeks with a young lady who's just had miscarriage after miscarriage after miscarriage, and you get to a point where getting pregnant isn't even exciting anymore. And she shared with me that she was pregnant again. She's not telling anybody. She told Nancy and me. And we remember that. Nancy and I remember those days. After her first miscarriage, we just didn't tell people until after 8 weeks. And definitely after the second miscarriage, you just didn't tell. No one shall suffer miscarriage if you just don't go into idolatry. No one, or be barren in your land. Hannah's prayer never happens if they just don't go into idolatry. I will fulfill the number of your days. Yeah, the unbelievable blessings that are laid open to us. And of course, the message for you and me is just this. What is it that I do or fail to do that causes me to miss out on the treasure trove of blessings that God has stored up for me? How do I disqualify myself? And if there's some way I'm disqualifying myself, I need to stop disqualifying myself. The incredible cost of idolatry. And then we come to 24:12, and it's just right here. The law of Moses is coming. We talk about the Mosaic age. We talk about the law of Moses. Where did it all come from? Exodus 24:12. Then the Lord said to Moses, come up to me on the mountain, there at Mount Sinai, and be there, and I will give you tablets of stone and the law and the commandments which I have written, that you may teach them. We're going to see Moses' temper come up again from this. But it is interesting. God calls Moses up. You can pick on Moses for anything he did wrong with his temper. I kind of like in this study seeing a little bit of Moses' temper, because I like that a man who could have been portrayed so perfectly that we're shown his imperfections, because we all have them. But it's Moses that God calls up on the mountain. It's not Moses and Aaron. It's not even Moses and Joshua. Joshua goes about halfway up and waits for him. And becomes the only other person not to participate in the sin down below. But it's Moses that God calls up onto the mountain. And we're not going to cover it later, but it's Moses who God calls into the tabernacle of witness and talks with him face to face. It's Moses that he says he spoke to him as if they were friends. He just sat down and had a conversation with God. That's Moses. And that's evidence that an imperfect man can have an amazing relationship with God if he'll be faithful. And when you're in 24:12, you're seeing here the law of Moses is coming to be. We run into here the common definition of nakedness, 28:42. It's a big jump, but we're going to go over 28:42. So, I meant to cover this in a morning sermon because I know it's needed, but it comes up about like, what does naked mean? And my daughters, sometimes comically, because the person can hear them, a boy will come by with no shirt on, and my older girls know better now, but they did it when they were young. But we just talk plainly about it. We're like, oh yeah, those people are naked. We're not going over there. And biblically speaking, they are naked. God uses the word naked differently than our culture typically does. If you're at a water park, those people are naked, biblically speaking. And so we'd say that guy's naked. And so, but you'd be out on the trail, and like Audrey's just like, oh, he's naked, you know. But the dude's got his shirt off. He's showing his body. He is biblically naked. Now, one of the places, not the only place, you can go back to Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve covered themselves with fig leaves, and God made them animal skins to cover their nakedness. They weren't appropriately covered. To not be appropriately covered is nakedness. And when you go back and you look at like Adam and Eve, it talks about he made them tunics. That typically it's covering your torso. So and men don't do this as often, although I mean, you know, it seems like men get more and more effeminate every day. So they'll probably start doing. We'll have men wearing low hanging necklines, and with the amount of sugar we eat, these men going to be wearing these low hanging necklines before too long. You watch. Okay, wearing short shorts, they might as well. But women will men just walk around with their shirt off. Women will walk around with their neckline plunging way down. or with a dress that's got like no back in it or very little back in it. It's showing all this. Well, look, designers know this. I did a whole lesson on this, and you read about how designers design these clothes. They say we designed the line of the clothes so that the imagination finishes what the eye starts. If you're not covering your torso, you're naked. This is important in this scenario. This isn't about clothing. Well, actually, technically, it is about clothing. They're talking about how to make it, and then they make it. But this isn't about fashion or style. This is about holy men of God engaging in one of the sacred practices, which would be the worship service and the offering on the altar. So going into the holy place and doing the worship in the holy place, and also going up to the altar and offering sacrifices on the altar. So the stakes are insanely high. And he says, and you shall make for them linen trousers. So this isn't the tunic part. The tunic part we handle elsewhere. But this is where we get the idea of, we got girls that'll walk around, and now guys, in these short shorts, or thinking that like a bikini, or, well, it's a one piece, is somehow, no, you're naked. Look at what he says about these trousers. To cover their nakedness, what? They shall reach from the waist to the thighs. To cut the thigh is considered your nakedness. The concern here was that if they were engaged in the worship of God and showed their nakedness, that he, at one point later on, he says, lest, I think it's later on this, he says, lest they die. The idea is God would be profaned by them doing something as profane as showing their nakedness while serving God in this act of worship. We are spiritual priests. We are a spiritual priesthood. It's not just our men. It's not just certain of our men. It's our men and our women. We are all able and capable of offering worship at any given time. And the concept being is this: we need to cover our nakedness. Now, to be fair, I do think it's inappropriate for us to be dogmatic on inches. And what I mean by that is this. You have somebody say, well, what if it comes to the knee? Are you naked? Well, what if it goes, no, it's got to go over the kneecap. Well, what if it comes an inch short of the knee? So on, blah, 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 all down the line. And so what you end up with is you end up with people making rules, which camps have to, and you know, different situations like that. They have to make rules, otherwise people wear the short shorts. But spiritually speaking, we end up making rules that don't actually exist. The rule that exists is this: don't show your thighs to people. Don't show your torso to people. Don't show your thighs to people. Well, what about a neckline that comes down just right here? Don't show your torso to people. Don't show your thighs to people. I'm not so sure that we need members of the church. I'm not so sure we need preachers to make specific clothing guideline laws about that. I think that elders, when they do their job well, can guide people in those areas. I think that the older ladies who are taught to teach the younger ladies can guide the women in that. And then the women, men, we have to be humble enough to hear. Younger women, you have to be humble enough to hear that older lady. She's not telling you that because she's gotten old and she's no longer as attractive as you. That is the thing that I would hear so often. Well, she's just mad because I look good. No, she's not mad that you look good, I promise you. She's trying to help you. And so we have to keep that in mind. We did a long stop there for clothing, but that is something we struggle with today because our society struggles with it. We're going to kind of breeze through the rest of these because we're done. So for your sermon notes, 31:18, you have the handwriting of God. God writes those first tablets with his finger. And then but see, here's the crazy thing that I never thought about this. I wonder if God did not originally intend to write the entire law of Moses with his finger. Because he writes this with his finger, and it's apparently the 2 tablets, the 10 Commandments, right? And then they worship the golden calf. the first massive mistake, first massive sin, 32:1 and following. And God says, get down there. They're doing this. You go handle it. And he goes back down the mountain to handle it. And we see him. He's the first person to break all 10 commandments at once, right? He throws the tablets down and breaks them. In what? In his anger, his temper gets a bit. Did God want him to break the tablets? There's no indication of that. In fact, the indication is the opposite, because he goes back up. He has to bring the tablets, and he has to write it out himself. And I know not all the law of Moses was on tablets like that. But what I'm saying is, it just makes me wonder how that plays out differently, or if it plays out differently, if the people don't worship the calf, and so he doesn't have to go back down, or when he goes back down, he doesn't break the tablets. Does God handwrite the rest of the law of Moses? I don't know. It's an interesting thought process. In 33:1 and following, they're on their way to Canaan land. 34:28, you have the 10 Commandments laid out there specifically. It's the first mentioning that I've seen of the 10 Commandments. 36:5, we have people who will die in the wilderness. And they have a great victory in 36:5, and that they were told to give a lot of stuff to make this tabernacle happen. And they give above what's needed. They're good givers. It's kind of an interesting thought, isn't it? The people who rebel against God and die in the wilderness, they were excellent givers. 39:32, we have our final look at the people who will die in the wilderness in the book of Exodus. They have another big victory. Big victory. In fact, Exodus ends on a high note. Big victory. They complete, amazingly, almost miraculously, they complete the tabernacle without breaking God's commandments about it. Especially in an artistic endeavor, it blows my mind that these people didn't say, well, it would look a little better, just knowing them, it would look a little better. We should do it this way. They didn't do it. They did it just right. They did it exactly as the pattern had been laid out. And then 40 verse 17 is our final stop. The tabernacle is erected. And if you think about it, that tabernacle really, and I think it's why it makes sense the book of Exodus ends here, it is the symbol of their deliverance. Think about when they first went to Pharaoh, what did they say they wanted to go do? They wanted to go out and worship their God. And now they have the physical representation of that place of worship and that place of communion. God is going to sit on the mercy seat in the tabernacle of witness, in the holiest of holies. He's going to dwell with them in a special way that he did not dwell with them or their ancestors in the land of Egypt. And so that's where we are. We've got our people out. They're out of the land. They have been delivered. And shortly to come, they are going to be tested in whether or not they'll go into that promised land. But before that, next week we have the exciting book of Leviticus. I don't know when the last time you read Leviticus is, but you ought to give it a shot this week. It's a little bit of tough reading. I mean, to be honest with you, for a modern American Christian, there's not a whole lot that applies, but it is written for our learning. So if you have opportunity to try to read through Leviticus this week, we'll pick up with that next week. We never want to leave without reminding you that you can obey the gospel of Jesus Christ. He is always calling you to come home to Him. If you believe in Him, John 8:24, repent of your sins, Luke 13:3, confess Jesus Christ, Matthew 10:32, and are baptized in water for the remission of your sins, Mark 16:16, in order to be saved, then you can walk this life with Jesus. Paul tells us in the book of Romans, he told the Romans that when you went down to that water, your old man of sin was put to death, and when you came out, you came to walk in newness of life. Have you ever done that? You can have a new life today if you obey the gospel of Jesus Christ. We have an elder on the stream. You can comment if you're on the stream. If you're here in person, we leave these front pews open for you. If you need to obey the gospel, or if you need to come home because you've wandered far away and you want the prayers and the encouragement of your church family, we're here for you. If you come while we stand, while we sing.